Hi, my name is Austin Bailey.
My name is Parker Johnson.
And I'm Katrina Long, and we'll be discussing underwriting considerations for cyber liability. Cyber attacks for both small and large companies of various industries have substantially increased over the past couple of years. With that being said, many companies do not have cyber insurance because they don't think that it's relevant to their business. However, any business that uses technology for operations or data storage of any sort is at risk. Cyber insurance provides first-party and third-party coverage to reduce risk exposure by offsetting costs due to cyber liability losses. First-party coverage covers insured's damage from cyber losses and helps minimize their own losses for a cyber liability issue, whereas third-party coverage is triggered by claims made against the insured from cyber attacks. Cyber insurance covers fines, penalties, and expenses associated with security and privacy breaches. Electronic media liability is third-party coverage. This covers non-media companies that have social media accounts or websites. Most electronic media liability claims arise out of copy infringement of pictures that companies are unauthorized to use on their website. Media liability coverage also covers any type of intellectual property, including claims from defamation, slander, and libel. Network extortion coverage covers costs related to ransomware attacks, including legal fees and expenses for advice, notification costs, forensics, credit monitoring, and PR-related expenses, along with ransomware demand and cryptocurrency broker fees. Cybercrime coverage covers funds transfer fraud resulting from triggers such as social engineering, invoice manipulation, and computer and telecommunications fraud. Since we are focusing on cyber liability, we are not going to go into the depth of first-party coverages, but one form of first-party coverage is business interruption coverage, which applies when companies can't operate due to lockdown of their network from a system failure or security failure. A company's network security is at risk when there's a weakness or vulnerability within their computer network. This could lead the cyber criminal to gaining access to data and potentially leaking it. One example of a network security issue is a distributed denial of service attack, in which tons of pings on a website cause it to break down, and then the network is not secure enough to handle it. This leads to the unavailability of one's website. A privacy breach is an unauthorized disclosure, whether it is stolen, lost, or accidentally shared, of third-party personally identifiable information. The cause of this breach could be due to a security failure resulting in a hack, system failure due to coding, sending information to a wrong source, or a rogue employee releasing information. Cyber extortion is similar to kidnap and ransom, but instead there's an attack or threat of the company's network and data. Ransomware is the most common form of cyber extortion. Bad guys can infiltrate a company's network, lock it down, and require a ransom to be paid in Bitcoin by a certain time. They will threaten to release and or destroy the company's data and prevent regaining access to the network and potentially making the malware destroy the hardware, also known as bricking, if this demand is not met. Cyber fraud is where a company's funds or assets are stolen by tricking individuals into providing information, personal or financial information, to the bad guy or wiring money to them. Examples of this include social engineering, invoice manipulation, and phishing. Some losses companies can face from these incidents include business interruption, reputational damage, directors and officers liability, cryptocurrency broker fees, data and software loss, third-party privacy claims, regulatory fines and penalties, defense costs, and incident response expenses. In order to mitigate cyber liability losses and first-party losses from a breach, a company should enact an incident response plan, which includes hiring an attorney for legal advice on the best method to notify customers, have a forensics team do the digging to determine the cause and source of the breach, offer credit monitoring services to customers, and enact the PR team to minimize reputational damage. Companies with customers and clients' data have a duty to protect and secure their personal information. These companies have a privacy liability. If this information gets leaked from a cyber attack, the company is held responsible and will likely face claims, some being class action suits. These lawsuits could result in the collapse of a company if they don't have cyber insurance or the necessary funds. Some regulatory bodies that enforce these cybersecurity standards are HIPAA, GDPR, BIPA, CCPA, and the FTC. HIPAA security rule establishes national standards to protect individuals' electronic, personal, health information that is created, received, used, or maintained by a covered entity. GDPR gives requires companies to provide a reasonable level of protection for personal data, and noncompliance could cost companies dearly. BIPA is an Illinois state law that imposes requirements on businesses that collect or obtain biometric information such as fingerprints, retina, and facial geometry scans. CCPA gives consumers the right to know about personal information collected on them and the ability to delete that info. If plaintiffs prove that the business failed to implement these security standards to protect personal information, each customer can receive between $100 and $750 per incident in damages, which is then fined to the impacted company. At a federal level, the Federal Trade Commission leads the charge with enforcing cybersecurity requirements related to the consumer privacy based on this reasonable security standard. When personal data is especially sensitive, companies are held liable to a higher security standard. Because of the constantly changing cyber environment and threats, the cyber regulatory environment has seen and will continue to see an overall rise in more specific cybersecurity requirements on top of an increase in enforcement measures.
So now we're going to take a look at a couple of examples of recent claims due to cybersecurity attacks. The first attack that we looked at occurred in November of 2013. It was where attackers used malware to hack into a customer database. This was with Target, and they used malware to hack in and steal credentials from a third-party vendor of Target. Over 100 million customers' data were affected by this attack, where full names, phone numbers, email addresses, payment card numbers, credit card verification codes, and other sensitive data were stolen. Target ended up reaching a settlement of $292 million for the breach, and they had a $100 million cyber insurance policy with a $10 million deductible. Insurance ended up only covering about $90 million of the $292 total. Another case we looked at was in May of 2017, where Equifax was hacked. This type of attack was an Apache Struts vulnerability, which is an issue with the Java software that they had in place. This created an easy break-in for the hackers, and info such as names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, and credit cards were stolen from over 148 million people. This settlement was more than $1.7 billion, and Equifax had cyber insurance up to $125 million with $7.5 million deductible. Insurance only ended up covering about $60 million of this. In November of 2014, large hacker group used malware to get past Sony firewalls. A lot of sensitive data such as emails, employee data, pirated copies of new movies, including the famously limited release of the comedy The Interview, and 47,000 social security numbers were stolen. Over 4,000 past and present employees were affected by the attack. They estimated the breach settlement would cost up to $35 million, but luckily they had a cyber policy from Marsh in place that covered the entire suit due to the fact that it was, quote, all well within the bounds of our insurance. The last case we took a look at was a bit different due to the fact that it involved a phishing scam that allowed hackers to use a vendor's name and password to infiltrate Home Depot's network. Over 40 million customer payment cards and 52 million email addresses were exposed to the hackers. This settlement came out to 17.5 million with 198 million in pre-tax breach expenses. Their cyber policy only covered 27 million of all these expenses. So here are a few examples that show differences in cyber insurance application and usage by sector. The figure on the left shows the estimated standalone cyber insurance take-up rates by each sector using Mars clients. As you can see, for each sector, the take-up rates for each industry increased each year from 2013 to 2015. This is probably due to the fact that evolving technology over these past few years has caused a heightened risk of cyber attacks. As shown on the left, healthcare and education are the outliers since they purchase much more cyber insurance. This is probably because both healthcare and education have very sensitive data that they need to keep secure, and most of the other industries did not feel they need to purchase cyber coverage. On the right side, you can see a graph where the model has since changed in 2020. It shows this global cybersecurity market share by application and proves that many more industries have begun purchasing cyber insurance coverage due to the fact of the high threat level of cyber criminals. Cyber attacks are causing huge losses for companies now, and some of the large sectors are starting to take notice. The top three sectors with the largest market share of cybersecurity are defense and government, banking and financial services, and insurance, and IT and telecom, respectively. So how do we assess risk? Larger companies are at a higher risk of cyber liability claims in comparison to small companies. However, small companies are still at risk, and a cyber attack could lead them to shutting down due to a lack of necessary funds to cover an attack. Companies that store a large amount of very sensitive personal data, such as social security numbers, dates of birth, and other highly personal information, are considered a high risk to cyber liability claims. Another key to underwriting cyber risk is by assessing a company's security practices, procedures, and standards in place. Higher risk companies have zero to minimal cybersecurity protocols. Assessing risk can be very tricky since the cyber market is relatively new, and because of this, there is very limited data on claims histories in certain industries. Even if companies have high security practices, they could still face a cyber attack because cyber criminals are finding new ways to infiltrate company networks.
Thank you, Austin. Now we'll be going through the tiers. Tier 1. These companies are more reactive and don't have any cybersecurity plans in place. They don't know their place in the external environment, and they really have no knowledge about cybersecurity. Then there's Tier 2 companies. These companies are aware of cyber risk and do implement some safeguards and precautions, but they do not implement these company-wide, causing gaps in their protection. They understand their place in the external environment, but have little resources to use and exchange info very rarely and irregularly. Then there's Tier 3. Tier 3 companies have implemented strategy that is management approved to protect them from cybersecurity. The implementation is company-wide and very descriptive. They understand their place in the grand scheme of things and share information regularly with other companies they do business with to better protect themselves and others. Then Tier 4. Tier 4 is a definition of proactive over reactive. They have the best technology for cybersecurity defense, have computer systems helping them run models using past cyber attacks to help predict future ones. Cybersecurity is not just a task, but is part of the culture for Tier 4 companies. They clearly understand their place in the external environment. They make sure information is correct and share openly and often with the community around them to make better and risk-informed decisions. Why would a Tier 1 might be more attractive than Tier 3, you might ask? Well, me and my team have come up with a handful of thoughts and ideas how this could be possible. First one that makes sense to us is that maybe a smaller company that uses less technology would be less likely to be attacked by a cyber attack. Another thought would be a company that is in Tier 1 with no background knowledge of cybersecurity, but they're willing to learn and show the underwriter that proven to him or her that they're willing to make the leap beyond Tier 1 and have more security. The biggest way to jump from Tier 1, in my opinion, though, if you have no cybersecurity background, is simply ask the underwriter if they know a third-party cybersecurity client that they could ask to hire to help protect their company. Now, how to be a better risk is insured. One way to be a better risk is implement employee training. Of course, employee training for phishing is the most common one, but employees should also be trained on what to look for as possible cyber attacks. This training should also not be just a one-time. It should be a regular basis and constantly being updated with the cybersecurity landscape. Next, the company could create a security plan SSP. A SSP is a summary of all security practices that keep your data secure. This document identifies features that protect you, such as hardware, software, security measures, training methods, and incident response plans. It's just a safe way to make sure nothing is falling through the cracks, and an easy way to check on everything you're doing to protect yourself. Excuse me. To finish up, you should do everything on the slide as well. Email exposure scan, vulnerability scan, security assessment, and so forth. But if any of this gets too overwhelming for you and your company and you really don't know where to go, the best thing to do is simply outsource the job to a professional cybersecurity company who can let you relax while they take care of it for you. How to reduce risk as an underwriter. There are a number of things an underwriter can do to try to reduce risk on their side. Excuse me. The first one an underwriter can do is pull coverage through endorsement. An underwriter won't do this for every scenario, though. This is more likely to happen with companies that do not have safety standards that meet the underwriter's expectations in certain aspects of the company. An example in cybersecurity is a company may not meet an underwriter's standard for minimum security, and on top of the company may have a lot of PCI, payment card industry. Because of this, the underwriter will likely pull coverage for PCI through an endorsement. Another thing an underwriter can do is charge additional premium for adding something that was originally going to be excluded. Depending on the level of the risk, the underwriter can increase the premium by 10 to even 20% to protect themselves better. A third option an underwriter can do is sublimit. Sublimit is when an underwriter puts a cap, either a number or percentage of what they will pay out in a particular loss. The number / percentage is always a smaller number than the policy's normal aggregate limit and or overall policy limit. An example of this in cybersecurity as of late is due to increase of ransomware attacks. Underwriters have started doing sublimits on words around system failure or contingent independent on so-and-so ransom attacks. A popular option for underwriters to better protect themselves is to modify policy language. By modifying policy language, an underwriter can limit the scope of coverage to specifically include or exclude a certain topic item within the coverage of the policy. An example of this in cybersecurity is changing the policy wording to include coverage only for security failure, but not system failure coverage. Very different. As a final precaution for an underwriter, they can create an attachment point at 50 million or under. This simply means the policy would not cover anything more than $50 million loss. And if it does, it would either be covered through reinsurance or through excess insurance, which still means another insurance company would cover the loss after the initial $50 million is depleted. Thank you for coming to our presentation.